Good afternoon, and thank you for attending the Greenleaf Center's Coffee with Joe Patrnchak today. As we wait for people to trickle in, feel free to start logging in your questions in our Q and answer function. Thank you.
Welcome to the 22nd webinar in the Coffee Series, sponsored by the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership at Seton Hall University. I'm Reggie Lewis, the Center's Executive Director, and it's great to greet you from our campus here in South Orange, New Jersey. The Coffee Series provides an opportunity to showcase the inspirational stories of servant leaders and the endless ways in which individuals, organizations, and society in general can be transformed by the power of servant leadership, a philosophy in which the leader first seeks to serve. And we're so thrilled to have with us today a returning Coffee with webinar guest and trustee of the center, Joe Patrnchak. Since 2014, Joe has been the head of Green Summit Partners, LLC, a consulting practice dedicated to helping organizations to bring out the best in people. He brings a wealth of experience to this role. Prior to establishing Green Summit, Joe served as Chief Human Resources Officer at the Cleveland Clinic, helping to create a culture in which all staff are considered caregivers. He essentially led a process of transforming the workplace in which everyone can be expected to deliver care with the same level of regard, regardless of their title or position with the hospital. This work has been recognized at the local, regional, and national level. Before joining the Cleveland Clinic in 2007, Joe served as Chief HR Officer and Senior Vice President at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. He also served as Vice President of Human Resources for HP Compact Digital, where he led HR for the $4.5 billion global customer services division. He holds a BA in sociology from Northwestern University. He also holds a Master's of Science in Human Resources Management and Organizational Development from American University. He's a graduate of the Advanced Executive Program at Northwestern University's Kellogg School and the International Management Program at INSEAD Fontainebleau, France. An author of several books on HR and servant leadership, Joe remains among the most prominent thought leaders on these subjects today. But of all the designations, we at the center are most proud of his role as past chair of the Board of Trustees for the Center for Servant Leadership at Seton Hall University. Before we begin our interview, Joe is going to share with us a brief overview about the Cleveland Clinic. We thought it was important to give our guests, our audience, some additional context before we move into the actual interview. So we'll learn a bit as a part of this opening about how this culture for this magnificent organization experienced a shift, which resulted in a dramatic improvement in patient care. And so I'll turn it over to Joe, and then we'll start the actual interview. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you for that great introduction. Appreciate it very much. So for those of you who are not aware of the Cleveland Clinic, that's a large organization with 8 to 10 regional hospitals Again, a $4.5 billion organization with operations in Canada, Abu Dhabi, over 43,000 employees, larger than that now, okay, with 3,200 physicians and scientists. Now, these are employed physicians and scientists. They're not contracted to the hospital, with 11,000 nurses and over 3,000 managers. So it's a large organization, well known for its innovation in healthcare. So next slide. We're going to talk a bit about the change formula, which is necessary to create any kind of change. But there is some dissatisfaction, and most change starts with dissatisfaction with your current state. And when I arrived at the clinic, being recruited there to help change the culture, of course, here were some of the dissatisfaction. The federal government had just launched its first HCAP survey with those dimensions along the left, in terms of how they measured satisfaction across the hospitals that took federal funds. And all of these areas were either slightly above or below, slightly above average or overall below average. So this was a level of dissatisfaction that needed to be changed, and it helped to stimulate some of the change. Next slide. The other area of dissatisfaction was the employee engagement. And according to Gallup, it takes 4.1 actively engaged employee to just neutralize the, I guess, negative behaviors of an actively disengaged employee. And that ratio after our first survey was actually significantly below that 4-to-1. It was actually 2.88-to-1. And to be working at world-class levels, that engagement score needed to be at least 9.6-to-1. So this was another area of dissatisfaction that needed to be changed and to help create the change we wanted to create. Next slide. So over the period of this work of introducing servant leadership and a number of other initiatives, all right, over a period of years, this negative engagement score actually grew to surpass the world-class level area, and we were actually working and delivering world-class service to some of our patients. So the message is that servant leadership can be a powerful tool to help create the transition the transformation that you need to create. Next slide. Oh, and by the way, our patient experience scores track right along with that. So we went from the 44th percentile all the way to the 90th percentile of satisfied patients. Oh, and by the way, our philanthropy grew as well. All right, most hospitals, this is not a well-known fact, most hospitals actually depend on philanthropy. Most hospitals would be out of business if they didn't have donors. And the donors that we touched here were not the big donors. They were the grateful patients. We had a program there called the Grateful Patients. And if you had a surgery or a procedure, if you wanted to be a grateful patient, would you consider making a contribution? And so these were small amounts, but they had a major impact. Next slide. So that was a bit of our progress over a period of years in the context for the comments I'll try to make today with regard to some of these questions that Reggie has and that you may have.
All right, and for all of our guests, I'm going to remind you, as Amali has already mentioned, please feel free to begin loading up the Q&A feature, the Q&A function, I should say, because we will devote at least half of today's program for our Q&A portion so that you can engage Joe directly with respect to this amazing story of organizational transformation. And Joe is modest in talking about this little thing that he was about or that he oversaw for an incredible amount of time, which has major ramifications for all of us who continue to study organizational transformation, particularly from the lens of servant leadership. And so that's why it's a treat, Joe, to welcome you back. One day you're going to send that football behind you in the mail to me. I've got now witnesses. And so for our audience, for the sake of our audience, I'm going to be talking with Joe about three categories, or we'll be pulling questions from three particular categories. One is about his formative years. So it's our opportunity to get to know the Joe Patrnchak and what influenced him during his formative years. And then we're going to talk a bit about some of those career milestones, particularly as relates to his work in leading the transformation of the Cleveland Clinic. And then we'll round out getting his perspective with respect to servant leadership and society. Again, it's always a treat to have you back, Joe. I got to ask, do you have let's see if I can do this. Here we go. It's partially showing. Do you have your coffee mug? Look at this. All right, great. Okay, let's begin. Most people don't know what I know, and that is that you grew up in a town or an area known as the Warren Youngstown, Ohio section of the state. What was it like growing up in the Warren Youngstown area? And again, people are learning about you for the first time. Joe Patrnchak is a twin, and so you might confuse him with another good-looking guy. So I'm curious, Joe, did anybody ever confuse you, though? Did you guys play tricks on your neighbors? Talk about mischief and all that happened in Warren Youngstown as you were growing up.
Well, Warren Youngstown, Ohio, northeast part of the state, is really it's the nickname is the Steel Valley, and it's because
Are you saying Steel Alley?
Steel Valley.
The Steel Valley, okay.
Steel Valley, because it was lined with steel mills, and so it's a very blue collar area. My father worked in steel mill. I think he started there when he was in ninth grade, actually. Right, and worked there for 37 years. So it's a blue collar town. It's not a very glamorous place, but it's filled with a lot of very sincere and honest people, and so I really benefited from all that. So it's a great place to grow up, but my brother and I, we didn't like playing tricks on people. We kind of wanted our own identity, and a lot of times we getting ready to go to school, we come down, we'd be dressed with the same clothes on, and so we got into arguments who was going to go change this time, because we didn't want to be dressed like the Bobbsey twins, you know what I mean? Right? We're not going to school dressed like the Bobbsey twins, right? But we look quite a lot alike. But that changed a little bit. My brother broke his nose, and so it was a little flatter, so you could tell us apart a little easier. But for a while there, it was pretty hard.
Wow. And talk about the folk in your town that inspired you, people you looked up to in the Warren Youngstown area.
Well, one of the people that I really looked up to was, like a lot of athletes, was one of my coaches. Okay, and he was our football and wrestling coach, really in junior high school, 7th grade, and he told my brother and I that we had the talent to play in the Big Ten. And nobody had really from this township school had ever gone to the Big Ten before. He goes, but it had to be our dream, not his. So 6 years later, we were playing against Ohio State as a freshman. Okay, and it was because of this coach. Being a wrestler and being an identical twin, somebody had to move up to heavyweight, which was me, and I was only 5 pounds heavier, and I was wrestling guys like 40, 50 pounds heavier than me. And so our wrestling coach said, you've got to be like Muhammad Ali. You got to get on your toes and move and be quick. And so I always admired Muhammad Ali as a great fighter, and of course I tried to adopt his style of wrestling. But the thing I really admired about him, and I didn't always agree with everything he stood for, okay, all right, but I admired his courage to stand for something besides just being a great fighter. And he took 3.5 years off his career and was broke, actually, okay, for standing up for his beliefs. So that influenced me to help, I guess, have me create a higher sense of purpose for my work too. All right, that was more than just making money and profits for a company, which is a good thing, and you need that. But try to develop a higher sense of purpose for why you're doing what you're doing.
And that coach, though, and we don't say enough about educators who can play these really influential roles. You know, that coach saw something in you, that coach helped you to see your own potential. And that's always wonderful to hear.
Yeah. He took us to an Ohio State game. And he said, I'm taking you to this game, so you're not going to be intimidated the next time you step into the stadium.
Mm. Wow.
You feel like you belong here.
Oh,
6 years later.
look at that. Look at that. And then your time as a college athlete, talk about how that experience even then helped to shape your emerging leadership style.
Well, one of the things of being a Big Ten football player is there's no such thing as an off season. Okay. During the off season, you get bigger, stronger, and faster. That's the goal. Okay. Of course, you have 6 weeks of spring football as well, but during the winter, there's no off season, right? And I've tried to, so this has been an influence, always been an influence on my approach as well, all right, in terms of every year you've got to get better. We have to improve every year. It doesn't have to be a lot, maybe 10, 15%, but we have to get better. We have to keep raising the bar to higher level of excellence, because if we're not growing, and if we're standing still, then we're going backwards. So so I could try to incorporate that into my leadership background as well.
That improvement, further development is always within reach. And that's always helpful to hear, particularly in a university setting, that we're all lifelong learners. Let's shift a bit, because this perspective clearly helped you to have a huge impact in the HR talent development space. And I'm always curious about the motivations for you with respect to, what drew you to human resources early on?
Well, when I got out of college, I had, a lot of people just felt that I would go into coaching because of my athletic background. And I wanted to get into business. But I didn't know the language of business. I didn't know the culture of business. I didn't know anything about it, really. And I went to work for a small staffing company in the Chicago Loop. And I learned how to sell. I learned the language of business. I learned how to recruit and evaluate talent. And then I went to work for one of the clients, which was Digital Equipment Corporation, as a recruiter. And then quickly, after 18 months, they promoted me to from Chicago to Minneapolis, and from Minneapolis to Cincinnati, and in generalist HR generalist roles. And that was my experience of just working as part of a management team, trying to run a profit and loss kind of environment there. Right? I will tell you though that for a while there, I got plateaued.
Oh.
Okay. And one of the reasons I got plateaued is that I started to listen to a lot of compliments that people were giving me, and these are people from outside of HR. They were salespeople, sales executives, services executives, and say, "What are you doing working in HR? You could be selling. You could be a service leader." Okay, so I kind of plateaued, right? And so, what do you do when you're a little confused and plateaued? You go off to a workshop, right? You go off to a course. And there's only one thing I remember from this course, and it changed my whole career. Part of the course was you had to write down in one sentence or two sentences the one thing that you do better than anybody else.
Oh, I love it.
Or do better than most people anyway. Very few of us do anything better than anybody else. And that's really a very difficult exercise when you think about it. And I started writing this down and started reflecting as the thing that I did better than a lot of people, even as an athlete, is that my brother and I trained so hard that it brought other people along.
Okay.
Okay. That inspired other people to do the same thing. And I started thinking, well, I think the one thing that I've always been good at is bringing out the best in myself, and doing so, bringing out the best in other people. And then I realized I stumbled into the right career. Because HR, in my view, HR is supposed to be bringing out the best in people in organizations. And then once I realized that I was in the right career and had the right competency to do that, I started to really take more risks, put the leadership level, pedal to the metal. And 18 months later, the first time I became a vice president.
Oh, look at that.
So when I'm often asked about for career advice, and the one thing I always share with people is find out the one thing that you do best. That's your core competency. And then ask yourself, are you in a role or in a career that allows you to manifest that core competency on a regular basis? If the answer is yes, then put the leadership pedal to the metal.
All right.
The answer is no, you might want to think about a career change. So,
wow. And spoken as a true servant leader in terms of having that deep sense of self-awareness, which helped to propel you further in the field that some of these guys were ribbing you about, which we all know landed you eventually as the chief HR officer at the Cleveland Clinic, where you certainly brought out the best in many people. But I want you to share something that I know from, again, my little research and some of our conversations in the past, that there were two instances that arguably changed your fate in connection to the Cleveland Clinic. This is early on. And so if you wouldn't mind sharing those instances and what was going through your head at the time.
well, having lived in Boston for many years, I was making a career change from Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and I was being recruited by a lot of different companies. And one of them was the Cleveland Clinic. And I really did not, I had to go visit the clinic because it's the Cleveland Clinic, and it's a great institution with a great reputation. But I did not want to relocate to Cleveland, Ohio. I mean, I grew up in that area. And then not that Cleveland is a bad area to live in. Okay. I had lived in Boston for a long time, and Cleveland is not Boston. Right. So, I was going in for my final interview with the CEO, Dr. Toby Cosgrove, and I was decided I was going to put myself into the environment in the hospital at 7 o'clock in the morning because my interview was at 7:45. Okay, doctors at the clinic started early, and so I decided I put myself into the environment just to see what it was like. And at 7 o'clock in the morning, tremendous amount of energy in the hospital, large hospital, shifts changing, patients being moved, and I stumbled across this chapel. I said, well, I go in there, maybe I'll get some advice on how to install this offer so I can get some of these other offers to fall into place. And I'm in the chapel all by myself, I thought, right? And one of the maintenance guys comes up to me and taps me on the shoulder and says, "Sir, are you okay?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm fine." I must have had a distressed look on my face. And he goes, "Well, I just want you to know I'm going to keep you and your family in my thoughts and prayers today." So I go from there to my meeting with Toby Cosgrove, and I told him about this situation. He goes, "Come on, I want to show you something." And so he takes me through the hospital. We're doing a rounding, walking in the patients' rooms and such. And he goes, we go back to his office. He goes, "Joe, that's why we're here. We're here for these patients. Now, are you coming?" I says, "Yeah, I'm coming." "Good, really?" He goes, "Yeah." "Well, don't you want to talk about money?" I said, "No, we'll figure that out."
What?
Okay. I guess I get on the plane, I'm flying back, and I go, I feel like it just had an out of body experience, you know. So I get back to my tennis club back here in Boston. And he says, "By the way, how was your trip in Cleveland?" Because it was a crazy day. I think I'm moving to Cleveland.
Okay.
But I tell you what, I was never disappointed living in Cleveland. Never at all. It's there's this old picture of Cleveland. That's not the picture of Cleveland today. Okay, right. So I had a great experience there.
Clearly, the town transformed as the hospital, as the clinic transformed, and obviously those instances that you shared, they speak to the reality that we never know when we're actually touching others, that we're helping to lift others. And here's a person in a department or an area, who has influence on you in that very moment by just demonstrating care. And then the person at the helm who engages you in a way in which, you're reminded about the mission and why Cleveland, the Cleveland Clinic exists to begin with. And so the work that you led there with respect to organizational transformation resulted in everybody adopting this notion of we are all caregivers, right? Whether you're that maintenance guy or the valet, the nurse practitioner. Say a bit about the steps you took to move. This is a massive operation. Were there 43,000 even at that point, and when you stepped into that role?
Yeah, it's closer to 60,000 now, actually. Okay.
So a massive organization, massive change, and yet to get everybody thinking we are all caregivers, that's huge.
One of the things that I noticed, and one of the things that I really appreciated of the CEO, who is known as a medical innovator. And when you're an innovator in one area, you tend to be an innovator in other areas. Okay. And so my first 6 weeks there, he calls me in my office, in his office. He goes, "Joe, what do you see?" And just your observations. What do you see? And I said, "Well, doctor, there's a couple of things I see, but several things I've seen. But the big one here is how we refer to people who work at the Cleveland Clinic. Huh. There's the professional staff, which are the doctors, and then there's the non-professional staff, which is everybody else." Okay. That includes the nurses, by the way, the non-professional staff. Right. Now, I realize you don't mean anything by it. You're just trying to differentiate between the doctors and the non-doctors. but I've worked in great service companies, and I've never worked in one where we had employees. We had teammates, we had associates. Okay, we had all kinds of names for people, but and by the way, we just did a survey, and only 33% of the people are connected to the mission of the hospital. Mm. Now, I never saw anybody die by installing a computer, but in the hospital, people die if people aren't committed to the mission. Mm. And by the way, 150,000 people die every year for conditions they acquire while in the hospital. Okay, all right. So hospitals are very dangerous places, or can be, right? If people are not committed to the mission. And I said, well, what do you recommend? I says, we may pull together a group of people, and let's come up with a name other than non-professional. Okay. So I pulled some nurses together, I pulled some doctors together, and formed I called it my Human Resources Planning and Development Committee. Mm. All right. And we came up with this idea that everybody's a caregiver. Mm. And the reason for that is everybody plays a role in creating an experience for an employee and for a patient. We had one woman who was she was a collector. She's the person that called you about your bill. Okay, right. And as we launched the caregiver programs across the country, across the company, to get people to really talk about how they were all caregivers, this woman said, well, I just collect the money. How am I a caregiver? I said, well, I have people try to collect money from me from a hospital. And when they called me, they were really pleasant. All right. And they were understanding. And they made me feel, and the first thing they asked me is how I was feeling. How was my condition? All right. So there's a way to collect the money that creates an experience, and a way to not to collect the money that creates an experience as well. All right. So we a caregiver is either in front of the patient or in support of somebody who is, and working together, they create this environment where everybody is providing care. And we launched these workshops for 9 months, all over the hospital and the community hospitals, to have everybody see how they played a role in creating an experience for a patient, either directly or indirectly.
Fantastic. And was it within 5 or 7 years you saw significant results, both in terms of employee engagement, people really wanting to work at the clinic, but also patients leaving a lot happier and more satisfied? Can you say more about both of those indicators?
Yes, what we saw was a significant spike, okay, in both areas. We did it with our second survey. We saw our engagement scores make a big spike, and our patient experience scores traveled right along with that the first year. Right? So it was well worth the investment. It wasn't cheap to deliver that, but it definitely paid off big dividends.
Clearly. And arguably, it's been a long-lasting impact, because obviously the clinic is still thriving, both in terms of employee engagement and patient satisfaction today, 2023. Say more about how they are sustaining that momentum, because as we've spoken about on prior sessions here as a part of the Coffee With series, it's one thing to arrive at a place in which the culture of an organization shifts, in which certain leadership can be felt, is viewed as being pervasive throughout a culture, but it's hard to sustain that kind of momentum. Can you say more about that, please?
Yeah, that's always a worry, that once you leave, someone who's been a big supporter of servant leadership, will it continue? Frankly, it's even gone to a bigger level. The Cleveland Clinic, there are a lot of organizations that benchmark the Cleveland Clinic for all its medical procedures, for many medical procedures. It's now being benchmarked for its leadership model. Now they've renamed it the Cleveland Clinic Leadership Model. They don't call it servant leadership, but all the tenets are there, right? Remain there, and all the principles remain there. But they've renamed it to be the Cleveland Clinic Leadership Model, and it's not only still pervasive, but they've actually taken it to the next level, which is really rewarding for me to hear that.
Fantastic. My young colleagues here reminding me that I'm soaking up all the time, so they're only allowing me to ask you one more question.
Okay.
So we do live in a time in which, there's a tremendous amount of polarization, divisiveness in our society. What's the role and responsibility of leaders throughout society, regardless of sector, to help bridge these divides?
Well, that's a big question, and a very certainly and a very relevant one. I would say that we have to look at what's behind some of this polarization that we have today. Okay. Now, I'm not a statistician. I'm not someone who will read the data on this, but I do have a lot of experience in this area. Okay. Early in my career, when this whole notion of diversity was emerging, right? And I've been part of a lot of backroom conversations too about this topic, as you can imagine. Some of them weren't positive, right? But my biggest feeling is that of why we're so polarized today is that it comes down to respect and valuing. Of course, we're going to be different. Difference is a part of life, okay? But unless we try to start to respect and value those differences, we're going to continue to have this polarization. Because if everybody thinks that you need to think like I do, we're going to continue to be polarized. Right? Now, the role of leadership is still here. I keep being motivated by a quote from Robert F. Kennedy, where he said, "The few of us have the greatness to bend history, but all of us have the opportunity to change small series of events." So, in terms of what can we do as leaders, we have to stay in the game. Servant leaders, we have to stay in the game. We have to persevere, and we have to believe in the power of you, the power of one, and the power of you, and believe that we can make a difference. And if we believe that, then we need to stay in the game, persevere. And by the way, leadership has never been easy. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, right? But I'm not pessimistic about the times. I'm realistic about it. These are some of the most challenging times I think I've lived through, right? But we need to stay in the game and persevere, because once we step out of the arena, the game is over. And I got to believe that most people on this call today, and most people who are going to view this call, really believe in the power of one, the power that they can make a difference. That's why you're here listening to me, hopefully to learn some things and put them into practice.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you, Joe, for staying in the game. Thank you for reminding us that we have the responsibility as servant leader practitioners to hang in there and stay in the game. Of course, I could go on for another hour, but I'm being told I've hogged up too much time. So I thank you for being a treat for us today. And I'm going to now shift over to Amalia, who is our fantastic project manager, who will lead us through the Q&A portion of the program. Amalia.
Thank you, Reggie. And thank you, Joe, for coming on again today. And let's start with our first question here from an anonymous attendee. How do you believe servant leadership contributes to engagement in the workforce?
Well, if you compare servant leadership to its traditional opposite, which is command and control, you begin to understand the differences. Servant leadership puts the people in the organization first before themselves as the leader. And when you put other people before yourself and you put the institution before yourself, you do more listening than a command and control leader does. All right. I get often asked the question, what's the different language that they use? All right. And the biggest difference is servant leaders listen more. They ask questions like, how can I better support you? What more resources do you need? What's keeping you up at night? These are all questions, okay, that servant leaders ask, and hopefully do something with the information. So this is just, and when people feel listened to, they feel valued, they feel respected. And when people are valued and respected and have a sense of purpose for what they're working on, they feel like they're integrated and they're a caregiver and they're important. They will give you that extra effort and that extra engagement.
Thank you. Another question that we have is, can you please give your definition of servant leadership and how this term may often be misinterpreted?
Well, I'll start off with how it's misinterpreted. Okay. The biggest misinterpretation of servant leadership that I've heard is that it's a soft form of leadership. How could you hold people accountable if you're serving them? Well, has anybody ever been served very well by having an easy goal, being held accountable to nothing? Chances are, when someone gave you a goal that you didn't have a line of sight of even how to accomplish it, you had to go talk to some people. You had to go maybe put a team together, all right, to learn about it, right? Oh, and by the way, you had to answer to somebody on how well or not so well you were doing, right? So servant leaders hold people accountable. They are constantly raising the bar in performance. So this is a big misunderstanding of servant leadership. It's not a soft form of leadership at all. Those elements of accountability and raising the bar are all there. My simplest definition of servant leadership is leaders who put their employees and the company before their own self and their own need for recognition. They put others first before themselves and do that in a way that brings out the best in them.
That's great. Thank you. And that actually ties into the last question that I have here. Servant leadership has been described as countercultural. How do we make it more attractive for those who already face so many challenges in carrying out their duties?
Well, first of all, leadership in general is not easy. So I'm not going to sit here and try to give anybody an answer to make it easy. Leadership is not an easy job. Okay, it's challenging. So what I'm going to say probably is not going to ease that challenge at all. Right? But will help you adapt or adopt servant leadership in a more readily fashion is that you're going to get better results than other people. Now, when you get better results and better performance, people are going to start asking the question, how's that person doing that? how's that guy getting all that, getting that customer satisfaction, getting that better revenue, right? So when you all of us as leaders, we're resource challenged, time challenged. But, you know, based on my religious background, I don't believe in magic. But I do believe that once a leader determines that something is strategically important, they find the money, they find the time, they find the energy, all right? And if you really believe that servant leadership is an important part of your strategy and is strategically important, you'll find the time, money, and resources to do it. But I'm never going to say it's going to be easy. I won't say that.
Yeah, it definitely does not sound easy. But you're right. If people want to move towards a practice of servant leadership, they'll find the time and resources to do it. Thank you so much, Joe. And that's all the questions that we have for today. And thank you so much for your conversation, sharing a bit about your life and, you know, the transformation of the Cleveland Clinic here today. And of course, for coming back and spending some time with us. It's always a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And it's a privilege to be on the call today with everybody. And I wish everybody the best of luck.
Thank you. And now I will share some updates about the center and what's new.
So I'll leave.
Thanks. So thank you again, everybody, for joining our webinar here, our Coffee with Joe Patrnchak. And so the Greenleaf Center is proud to present its second annual Hall of Fame. This accolade recognizes individuals and organizations who have demonstrated a long-standing commitment to placing a primary focus on the well-being of others, everything that Joe talked about today. Some local honorees include Dr. Chris Purnell, who was actually at our last Coffee With webinar last week. And if you want to watch that, it's on our YouTube channel. Father Edwin Leahy of St. Benedict's Prep and the Community Food Bank of New Jersey. Tickets and sponsorship opportunities are available until September 15th, and tickets will be available until the day of. So if you would like to learn more, you can go on to www.greenleaf.org/Hall of Fame. If this webinar inspired you to learn more about how you can become a servant leader and even transform your own workplace culture, registration is now open for our September Foundations of Servant Leadership course. Seats are filling quickly, so be sure to register soon. You can learn more at www.greenleaf.org/Greenleaf Academy. And thank you all again for attending. As you leave the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a survey. We encourage you to do so. And thank you again. Have a wonderful day.